Alright everyone, 2 days ago I would have reported on this, but again, when I choose to have a fifth or even sixth video because you got breaking news, sometimes a story has to be bumped, and if it gets bumped 2 days in a row, it's a little bit outdated. But for those that don't know, Italy's Salvini, their leader there, has decided to divert some funding from the migrant crisis sort of stuff, basically paying benefits to people who are, basically illegally there in Italy. Asylum seekers, which in some cases are not technically seeking asylum for any legit reason, not related to any civil war or political violence. He's decided to divert some of that to paying, police for working overtime, partially related to the fact that you have this crisis. Italy is a major port of call for people that want to enter Europe. The thing is, a lot of them don't stay in Italy for very long. They're making their way to Germany, making their way to France or wherever, to the Netherlands or Belgium, Switzerland or something. But Spain and Italy and Greece in particular, and Turkey too to an extent, are the main countries ringing Europe that have this problem, because that's the place you enter Europe. You're probably not going all the way up through Russia, say, hey, I'm going to vacation in Moscow and then come across to the west through like Belarus or the Ukraine or something. Probably not going to happen. People, go boating across the Mediterranean, and a lot of these ships end up sinking, or, fucking pirates get a hold of them probably and enslave everybody. They come from certain ports through to Italy, over to Greece, some of the islands there, and then they sort of... Greece, I think, had the major problem several years ago with this, where over 100,000 people were in Greece, sort of awaiting. They wanted to go, I can't remember exactly where they were trying to go through, but the other countries wouldn't let them through. So they were stuck in Greece, and the Greek government's like, we're having a cultural meltdown here because there are so many people. We can't keep track of them. We don't have the money, our economy's already broke because of socialism, so we can't pay anything. People are already prostituting themselves for the price of a sandwich, so you can't tell us that this is a legitimate situation. You need to let them through. Go visit Merkel or something, and I think they've managed to gain clearance for them. I think Macedonia eventually let them through with the understanding they're not staying in Macedonia or something. It's very funny how much you're beginning to see rifts in the European Union states. And even, places in Europe that aren't part of the EU, like the UK or maybe Turkey. You're beginning to see major diplomatic and cultural rifts and political rifts too begin to form. And this is exactly what I predicted half a decade ago when I said that the European Union would inevitably fail. It's just a matter of time. You're going to get, increasingly, the death of the old political establishment. What replaces it doesn't matter. What does matter is that it will not be the same in each country. Increasingly, they will no longer be able to govern the EU states, or indeed the entire region, because these governments will not be able to agree on anything. There's a huge economic, cultural, linguistic, and everything else difference between a state like Italy, the kind of economy they have, the kind of national policies, the populism they're developing, and a state like Germany or France. There's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between Poland and Spain. There's a difference between the Czech Republic and Hungary. There's a difference between Belgium and Switzerland. All of these states, EU and non-EU, have different cultures, different languages. It's a patchwork country. It's fundamentally not like the US. In the United States, under the formation of the country, when you think of when the whole continental United States was fully developed, when there weren't any territories there left, it was mostly homogenous culturally. The subcultures were vastly diverse, but culturally, 90% of the population was simply American, specifically at that time white American. They spoke the same language. Yeah, there were other languages spoken, like you'd have an Italian community in New York City, or an Irish community in Boston or something. The dialect, the slang, maybe even the language, the parlance and common culture would be different. Like, the family speaks Italian, but they knew how to speak English as well. Obviously, it was the lingua franca, it was the business language, the economic language, the language that was spoken, taught in school, and so it bound the country together. You don't have this over in the EU. You simply don't. You have a patchwork of states that are vastly different. The economic situation's vastly different too. At the major formation of the modern United States, we're talking in the 40s through the 50s, the United States, the continental proportion of it fully developed. It's fleshed out. They're rural and urban areas, but things are generally settled. You start building highways between, major ports of call, and the economy begins to take on its modern form. Already by that time, there was some degree of equality throughout the U.S. Yes, you have like rich neighborhood, poor neighborhood, but as far as the states went, the states being similar to European countries, including in size in some cases. My state's small, it's the size of Albania. Texas is bigger than Germany, so you gotta think of it. Alaska's bigger than any Europe. It's like, twice the size of Ukraine alone. You look at it like that, and you look at Europe today. The differences between, say, Serbia and Belgium are massive, absolutely vast. There was no similarity between that situation and even like 50, 60 years ago, the United States. So my thinking is this: the European Union inevitably, because of the massive disparity between these countries, cannot function as a coherent unit. Eventually, in one situation or another, people simply polarize into blocks. It tends to form political blocks as well, sometimes with strange bedfellows. Eventually, you'll end up with some sort of echo chamber sort of situation where some of Europe is very populistic, kind of nativistic, more traditionalist, not necessarily economically right-wing, but culturally so, more protectionist of its cultures. And then you have the other side, which presumably will be led by the Germans, which is very cosmopolitan, multicultural, whatever that means, diverse, things like that, and more, at least socially, more left-leaning. You're going to get these blocks forming. What'll happen is that both of these groups will reinforce themselves within their own territory by looking over. They will campaign, because these are representative systems, against the other people. And eventually this will rip the European Union apart. You'll end up with at least two, sub-European Union style groups emerging, probably more. The UK that's already left is slowly dragging the Scandinavian countries away from the EU, especially Denmark and Sweden. It has already begun to happen. They've openly been talking about, hey, what if we had like a North European sort of currency confederation of sorts? Our economies are more similar. We have more in common with one another economically than some of these other countries. It makes more sense. We could function more easily. We'll just form a loose sort of confederation system or something between our countries. We'll leave the EU maybe to do this. If that were to happen, the EU would greatly hasten in its demise. You could see a South European confederation of sorts led by the Italians, I think, or more partnered with Spain probably. The Germans and French would both have a bloc probably together, and then you'd probably end up with an East European situation led by the Polish. So you might have the tale of 4 or 5 different Europes. This, by the way, would be good for Europe. It wouldn't be a bad thing. You could even keep like the Schengen concept of free movement within Europe itself, and it wouldn't really be a problem. The reason why it would be beneficial is that the economies within these groups would then have more in common. Because they're more local and not as expansive across the whole continent, they would have a little bit more culturally in common, and they would be able to govern things more easily. Having these smaller European blocs would make much more economic sense. They could still cooperate with free trade, free movement, and so forth very, very easily. It just means you have a few extra pieces of paper. The problem is that people like Merkel and Macron, the globalist crowd, they make a lot of money and have a lot of power and a lot of prestige because of the way in which Europe currently functions. They don't care how many toes they have to step on to keep power. The problem is that they're going to hold on and fight tooth and nail to preserve a union that is fundamentally broken. When Salvini says, hey, essentially ignores Merkel and ignores the others and says, no, we're not going to keep paying these people at all. I don't care if they go to Germany. I don't care if they wander through here to go to France or whatever, but, they're not Italians. When we need our police to have more money because they have to keep working overtime, I'd rather pay them. There you have populism. Some people will consider it bigotry. I just look at it and I say it's a natural political and cultural reaction to an overwhelming crisis in a situation where it is impossible for the European Union's centralized government to properly represent everyone at once. Inevitably, if you make a decision that impacts that many countries with that many cultures and different economic situations, inevitably somebody is fucked. Somebody gets screwed by any decision you make. You tariff the good, this country benefits, and that one suffers a detriment. You remove the tariff and it goes in reverse. You have more immigrants coming in, these people are pissed off at you, and these people like the idea because they need more younger laborers, they think. You don't have enough immigrants, then those people, their businesses, they can't find workers, they have to import them from these other countries. That's the way that the European Union works. It even works on a sub-level here within the United States. The states do have different economic arrangements and subcultures and so forth. A decision on the federal level that's made that people in blue states tend to like may piss off red states, vice versa. The difference, of course, being we've been bonded together for several centuries. It's totally different from Europe that 100 years ago they were slaughtering one another. There's a big difference in the two situations. That's about all. Peace out.